Welcome back to GLBC Connections. Stormy, do you welcome everybody back? Yeah, good for you. Well, today we want to take a quick look at the end of Mark chapter 9, not quite all the way to the end, Mark 9, 30 to 35. As we do that, I want you to think about what it means to be a servant. When I say you need to be a servant, and we say that as Christians all the time, what does that mean? Well, I had a acquaintance of mine come and mow my lawn once for me. Does that count as service? The answer, I think, is yeah. I think we would agree that counts as service. The other night, about 4:30 in the morning, I got a text message. My neighbor had fallen down, was struggling to get back up, and so I ran next door in the middle of the night and helped him get back up. Is that service? I mean, I guess it is. We would call that service. It wasn't really that big a deal. It just took me a little bit of time and a little bit of lost sleep, but really not that much. I don't think I had anywhere to go the next morning anyway, so it really wasn't that big a deal. It was more just a concern for my neighbor. So when I talk about service, as Christians we talk about sacrificial service. What do we mean by that? Well, here I think Mark 9 has something powerful and profound to say about service, and I think we need to listen to it. It's really two things tied together, but I think they're tied together closely. I want to read them for you, and I want you to listen. This is Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 30. Leaving that place, they were passing through Galilee. He, that is Jesus, did not want anyone to know, because he was teaching his disciples and telling them. And now listen to what he was teaching them. The Son of Man will be delivered into human hands, and they will kill him. But 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. But they did not understand this statement, and they were afraid to ask him. Well, it's interesting. Jesus predicts his death, his suffering and his death, and he tells the disciples, and what's their immediate reaction? They don't quite get it. What don't they get about it? I think it sounds so strange that the one they think would be king would give up his life, and because of that, they can't quite comprehend what he is really talking about. Well, tie that in to the next conversation they have. This comes right after that conversation comes this one, and I do think they're very closely tied together. They came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" So they're going, they're traveling, and the disciples obviously are arguing about something. Jesus asked them what it's about. But they were silent, because on the way they had been arguing with one another about who was the greatest. Sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, "If anyone wants to be first, that person must be the very last and servant of all." Well, they're arguing about who's the most important, and Jesus says, no, you guys don't get it. It's not who's the greatest. Doesn't come from accolades. It doesn't come from your relative importance. Greatness comes from the level of service, the level of servant that you are, your willingness to put aside all of your needs for the needs of every other person around you. When we put it in those terms and then realize that it's tied together tightly with Jesus' death and resurrection, we begin to understand Christian ethics. Christian ethics are not based on getting what I need, what I want, but sacrificing for the good of others, even to the point of death. That's service. It is giving up every last little bit of your rights, every last little bit of right you have to safety, to comfort, to your own well-being, and giving it up for the ability to serve other people. What does that actually look like? Well, here I want to tell you about Maximilian Kolbe. Maximilian was a Franciscan priest in Poland in 1941. He had some German ancestry, and so when the Germans invaded Poland, they went to Maximilian and said, if you renounce your Polish citizenship, and if you embrace your German ancestry, that will lead to some privileges, and perhaps you won't have to, bear the trials and tribulations of the Polish people quite as much. Already Maximilian was quite well known. Maximilian declined to do that. In fact, rather than accepting any sort of accommodation, he began to write harshly against the German occupation. For that reason, they threw him into Auschwitz, and I'm sure you know that Auschwitz is quite famous for the sheer number of people that were killed there. And this was early 1941, before it had turned into the death factory that it became, but nonetheless it was still a place where many people died and many people suffered. Maximilian was there, and while he was there, he continued to minister to the Polish people that were in Auschwitz with him, ministered to them as best he could. For that, he suffered many, many beatings, but he would not be quiet. He continued to serve at great, great cost to himself. Finally, again, still, I believe it was still in 1941, 10 people managed to escape Auschwitz, 10 Polish citizens. The Germans wanted to discourage any such future attempts, and so the camp commander said, in exchange for those 10 men escaping, we will now starve 10 men to death. And so they chose at random 10 men from Auschwitz. One of the 10 was led off to this basement to be starved to death, and as he did, he was yelling, I have a wife, I have children, you can't do this to me. Maximilian Kolbe, in an act of incredibly great self-sacrifice that really truly modeled what Jesus was talking about, stepped forward and offered to take the man's place. They let the man free, and Maximilian was tossed in the basement and starved to death. Well, even in the last 2 weeks of his life, Maximilian continued to serve those men. He prayed with them, ministered to them, and he was in fact the last one to die. But he died down there, giving his life for another, giving all his rights. This is a man who could have had accommodation from the Germans, but he gave it up. And the man whose place he took lived to be 93 and never, ever stopped telling people about what Maximilian had done for them. What does it mean to be a servant? It means more than just doing little things for our neighbors. It is a tremendous act of self-sacrifice. It is giving up all of our rights, getting involved with the lives of others no matter what, and being willing to do whatever is necessary, even at great cost. And yet that's the path to glory as well, is the Christian life. It's what we're called to, and it is in that we find our satisfaction and our hope. That's what it means to follow Jesus. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed Maximilian's story. I hope that it encourages you to think about how you serve others.